Code initializes a two-dimensional array board of characters with dimensions, rows, and columns. Then, it defines a method int_board open and close parentheses to initialize the game board with empty spaces by iterating over each cell of the board and setting its value to a space character. This method also prints a welcome message for the game.
This code defines a method named displayBoard that is responsible for printing the current state of a game board to the console. The code assumes the existence of a 2D array named board that holds the game board data. It also assumes the existence of constant or variables rows and columns that specify the dimensions of the game board. The display game board will have a grid-like appearance with rows and columns separated by horizontal and vertical lines. Each cell's content is printed within the grid boundary.
Um, Here's the code. Um, to put it more simply, this code searches the game board horizontally for four consecutive pieces that belong to the winning player in order to determine whether they have won. The method returns if true, in the case that a sequence of this kind is found, showing that the player has won. Otherwise, it returns if false, if there fails to be a winning combination or situation. Example of this is public static boolean check win, char player, check if the player won the game, and check horizontally with four lines. For integers, row equals 0 semicolon row less than rows semicolon row plus plus. For integer, column equals 0 semicolon column less than columns minus 3 semicolon col plus plus. And check if there are four consecutive pieces of the same player horizontally. Return false semicolon if no winning combination found, or no winning in combination situation, it returns false. That's all. Thank you.
This code checks for a vertical line of four consecutive characters matching the player symbol player on the game board. It iterates over each cell of the board, checking if the current cell and the next three cells below it in the same column contain the player's symbol. If such a sequence is found, it returns true, indicating that the player has won vertically. Otherwise, it continues searching through the board.
This part of the code checks for diagonal win conditions for a given player on the board game. It covers both diagonal directions, the top left to bottom right, and the bottom left to top right, and returns true if either condition is met, otherwise returning false. So, in the first loop, or the first nested loop, iterates through each cell of the board game, starting from the top left corner, or the row 0 and column 0. The outer loop, or the row, iterates from 0 to rows minus 3. And the inner loop, or the column, iterates from 0 to columns minus 3. This ensures that the loop doesn't go beyond the bounds of the array while checking for diagonals. And inside the nested loops, it checks if there are four consecutive cells diagonally that are occupied by the same player, while the second nested loops checks for the diagonal connections from bottom left to top right. The outer loop iterates from 3 to rows minus 1, ensuring that it starts from the fourth row since we need at least 4 consecutive cells to check diagonally. And the inner loop or the column iterates from 0 to columns minus 3, similar to the first loop. Inside this loop, it checks for 4 consecutive cells diagonally, bottom left to top right, occupied by the same player. Similar to the first loop, if it finds such a sequence, it returns true. The return false is when there's no diagonal win found, and if none of the conditions in the loops are met, the function return false, indicating that the player hasn't won diagonally.
At my part program defines a method is board full that checks whether the game board is completely filled with characters other than the space character. The methods check each cell of the game board represented by the 2D board array. It iterates through each row and columns of the board using nested for loops. If at any point it encounters an empty space in the board array, board row and call it immediately returns false, indicating that the board is not full. If it completes the loop without finding any empty space, it returns true, indicating that the board is full and there are no more available positions for new moves.
Everyone, so in this part of our bingo game code, we have a method called board, which is responsible for displaying the current state of the board and handling the player's turn. First, we call the init board method to initialize the board with empty spaces. Then, we enter a while loop that keeps running indefinitely, ensuring the board is continuously displayed. Next, we display the current state of the board using the display board method. Now, it's the player's turn. We prompt the player to enter a column number between 1 and 7, where they want to place their piece. After the player enters their choice, we subtract 1 from the input matches the array index. We then enter the up for loop that iterates through the rows of the selected column starting from the bottom row. If we find an empty space in the column represented by a blank space in the board array, we place the player piece represented by X in that position and break out of the loop.
If the players connect the 4 same symbols, it will win the game and it prints congratulations you win after the game. And then if there's no vacant in the board, it will print its draw.
In this code, the program simulates the computer's turn by selecting a random column to place its piece, recognized by OIN. It keeps selecting random columns until it finds one that is not full. Once the program finds an empty slot in the chosen column, it iterates through the rows to find first empty space and then place its piece there. This process is repeated until the computer successfully places game piece in the first empty slot of the selected column.
To discuss our last part in research project, I will discuss how it works. So, the first if statement checks if the computer has won the game. It does this by calling the function checking win, which likely checks if the computer's move have formed a winning combination. If the function returns true, indicating that the computer has won. The current state of the game board is displayed using a displayBoard function. A message you lose, computer win, is printed through notify the player of their lose. A series of decorative lines are printed to separate the messages. The break statement is used to exit the logo or method, assuming this code is within a loop or method. The second if statement checks if the board is full, indicating that the game has ended in a draw. It does this by calling the functions in is board full, which likely checks if all spaces on the game board are filled. If the board is full, the following actions are performed. The current state of the following board is displayed using the displaying board function. A message it's a draw is printed to notify the players that the game ended in a draw. The break statement is used exit the loop or the method.
The program we developed offers a user interface with two distinct options. The first choice allows users to engage game of strategic skill against a computer opponent in game of bingo lineup, where victory entails forming a lineup for either horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. The second option offers an exit for users wishing to conclude the game.